Coming up on episode 76 of In the Front Row, it's broadcaster Kenny Albert. He shares his journey with us, the son of a longtime Hall of Fame broadcaster, Marv Albert, making a name for himself as he has broadcast all four major sports. He's been on Fox Sports, also doing a lot of NHL hockey on Fox and now on TNT. Shares his journey, shares his advice, talks about some of his great partners he's had, especially the late Tony Siragusa. We get into a lot here. It's episode 76. Broadcaster Kenny Albert is our guest in the front row. Kenny, again, thanks for spending a little time with us, taking time out of your schedule, very busy schedule, and I know it's busy because you're a guy that does every sport out there. So again, we thank you for spending a little time. We're going to get into your story and all the things that got you to where you are right now. And for you, obviously, it starts with your last name, Kenny Albert. You're the son of Marv Albert, but also you have uncles Al and Steve. At what point growing up did you realize kind of what those guys were doing and realize that maybe this is something that you want to do as well?
Well, I was actually the first one born with the last name Albert. Their name growing up was Alfrichtig. Mm-hmm. And my grandfather owned a grocery store with his brothers in Brooklyn, New York. It was called Alfrichtig Brothers. And once my father was on his way to Syracuse University, he was the oldest of the three brothers. And it was apparent that he was going to get into broadcasting. They changed the last name. They wanted to keep it an A, so the initials and the monogram would stay the same. And I was actually the first one born with it. So I knew pretty early, growing up around it, being around my father and my uncles. It was really all that I ever wanted to do. And my parents gave me a tape recorder for my birthday. I was around 5 or 6 and set up my bedroom like a radio or TV studio. I had the desk and then the bed in the middle and the TV on the other side. And I started announcing games into the tape recorder. And it was never anything that I was forced to do or told that I had to do. I just loved doing it. So it started way back. And then when I was old enough, I would bring the recorder to various sporting events. And I was really fortunate in high school in 10th grade, January of 1984, a small cable station in a neighboring town on Long Island, Cox Cable of Great Neck, came to my high school, which was in Port Washington, to film a girls' basketball game. And I was always around the gym and the various fields covering the events for the high school newspaper and the town newspaper. And I was introduced to the producer. They had 2 cameras, a little production van, and that was it. So I volunteered to announce the game. Spoke to him the next day, and he gave me the opportunity over the next 2.5 years to do play-by-play for all of these games around Long Island, high school and even Division III college games at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And it was an unbelievable experience. I would bring friends along as color analysts, and we would do all sports, basketball, baseball, hockey, football, soccer, lacrosse. And back then, high school students didn't really have the opportunity until they went off to college. Now it's a little bit of a different story. So I was just so lucky to have these reps and do what I loved during my high school years. And that was definitely a huge break early on.
Having that last name, being Marv Albert's son, obviously some advantages, but were there challenges as well that came along with that?
There probably were, but I didn't realize it at the time. It was great. I mean, I got to tag along to so many events, basketball, hockey, football, a little bit of baseball. And when I was old enough, I would start to keep the stats for him. So at Rangers games while I was in high school, Knicks games in college, and really learned via osmosis. It wasn't necessarily, he wouldn't sit down and give me a lesson, for example, but I would listen to the games, watch the games. When I was in the booth handling the stats, I would listen to the communication between the production truck and the announcers, for example, and just learn so much by observing. And then I know I'm skipping ahead, but after college, my first professional job was in Baltimore, Maryland, doing minor league hockey. And those were 2 years that I wouldn't trade in for anything, just getting the reps and the experience and doing so many other things for the organization, PR, marketing, sales, picking up players at airports, for example. And then I moved down to Washington for 3 years, was with the Capitals and home team sports. My first 5 years out of college, I was living away from home and working, and I felt that went a long way towards establishing my own identity and getting the reps for those 5 years, whether it was hockey or filling in on some basketball and baseball and other sports as well. So, all positive, had great experiences, like I said, growing up, tagging along and handling the stats and just tried to absorb everything that I could.
And you mentioned you went coming out of college. You didn't go to Syracuse like your dad, who's a very prominent and famous alum at Syracuse. You went to New York University. Why that? Why not Syracuse? I guess as an alum myself, following in his footsteps to Syracuse.
And he actually finished at NYU. He went to Syracuse for 3 years and then started working with the great Marty Glickman, another Syracuse alum. So, little known fact, he went to Syracuse for 3 and then finished at NYU. I had 2 criteria, believe it or not. Number one, I did not want to be away from NHL hockey for 4 years. So I was looking in Boston, Washington, wound up going to NYU. I also felt that whether it was Syracuse or so many other unbelievable broadcasting schools, I had heard that there were so many students that wanted to do play-by-play broadcasting that you might not get an opportunity until your sophomore or junior year. And again, those are great schools, and I have a lot of friends that went to Syracuse and have unbelievable jobs. But it turns out at NYU, I was still near NHL hockey, but there were 6 of us in a school of 35 or 40,000 that wanted to do sports on the radio. And we were all friends. We would switch off play-by-play, color, producer, engineer, statistician. And we had a great Division III men's and women's basketball program. They did not have baseball at the time. They do now. There was no football. So it was really only basketball and some sports talk shows and updates, et cetera. But right from our freshman year, first game, the 6 of us were able to be involved at a high level doing the broadcasts on the campus radio station.
What is it about hockey for you? I've never called a hockey. I know it's obviously fast paced. What is it about a hockey that you enjoy, maybe as a spectator, but maybe enjoy more as a broadcaster?
For some reason, I really took to it early on. Loved all sports, all 4. But hockey on radio was my goal when I was in high school and college. When I was 12, the U.S. Olympic team won the gold medal in Lake Placid. So there was a huge boon in the sport back then. I played hockey, wasn't very good, but I did play as a kid and then on a club team in high school and college. So it was a lot of fun. And that was the one that I was really drawn to. And that was my goal. And like I mentioned earlier, when I had the opportunity with Cox Cable, that certainly led to the variety of sports. And then when I worked in D.C. back in 92 through 95, it was primarily the Washington Capitals, but I would fill in on some Bullets games, now the Wizards, some Orioles games, and did a lot of college sports, ACC, CAA, including a number of games down at UNC Wilmington on your campus back in 93, 94, 95, men's and women's basketball. So, again, by getting involved in so many different sports, always loved the variety. And then the Fox football opportunity came along for a number of us in the right place at the right time in 94. But hockey was the original goal. That was my first job for my first 5 years. And, here we are, 30 plus years later. And I've been with MSG Network doing the radio for the Rangers since 95 and NHL and NBC, and then Turner over the last 2 years, and real fortunate to have called the Stanley Cup final twice in the last 3 years, back in 2021 and again a couple of months ago when Vegas defeated Florida.
Yeah, certainly one of the more prominent voices and faces on NHL hockey these days in the broadcast. And you mentioned the Olympics, the 1980 Olympic team. We had Mike Eruziani on here recently. You got to call Olympic hockey as well. What was that like? I mean, we talked to Olympic athletes playing for their country. What's it like broadcasting, an Olympic sport?
It's so special. I've had the opportunity now. It's 6 Winter Olympics, 2 summer. Of the 8, 6 in person, and the last 2 were out of the studio up in Stamford, Connecticut following the pandemic. But a story that I tell in my book, which is coming out in a couple of months, October 10th is the publication date. A lot of us have crazy stories. I'm sure you have some, Mike, on how you initially got a certain job along the way. In 2002, the Salt Lake Olympics were about 2 weeks away, and I got a phone call that Mike Emmerich, one of the great hockey announcers of all time, had to pull out. His dog was sick, and he and his wife have a lot of horses and dogs. They're animal lovers, and he did not want to leave his wife home with the sick dog for 2.5 weeks. And that's how I got my first opportunity, believe it or not, at the Olympics in 2002. So I've called men's and women's hockey at the last 6 Winter Olympics. It's been so much fun. It's definitely a whirlwind. It's 2 weeks and anywhere between 15 and 25 games, oftentimes 2 a day. And it's great. Just so many terrific memories. And probably the biggest one is the women's gold medal game in 2018 in Pyeongchang, South Korea. Canada had won the gold at the previous 4 Olympics, and the U.S. Took them to a shootout and wound up winning the game. So that's certainly among the top 5 games that I've called all time as far as the excitement. It's the athletes playing for their country, and the U.S. happened to win the gold medal that night. So called a number of other gold medal games on the men's side, the women's side. And then during the Summer Olympics, some sports that I'm not as familiar with. I was asked to do track and field in 2016, volleyball during the 2020 Olympics. So enjoy those challenges. Not ashamed to admit I bought track and field for dummies, volleyball for dummies. Sat down with the local high school volleyball coach for about an hour and a half, and I told her, teach me everything you know about the strategy, the history, the rules, etc. So that's a fun part of what we do is occasionally getting out of our comfort zone and doing some other sports that we're not as familiar with.
And as you said, some of these stories you can read about them. A Mike for All Seasons coming out October 10th, published by our friends from Triumph Books. That goes to the preparation, right? I talk about that a lot when I talk to younger broadcasters. I go back to John Wooden saying failing to prepare is preparing to fail. When you do that, have you ever had hesitation and said, no, I don't want to do that sport, I just don't know it? Or do you feel like and trust your preparation is going to help you get through that?
I've tried to take on all challenges. The one sport that I did wind up, having a bit of an issue with, it was during that time with home team sports. It was around 94, 95. It was the ACC wrestling championships, college wrestling. And I prepared, I studied, I spoke to an Olympic wrestler, Jeff Blatnick, on the phone, who filled me in, did all kinds of research. And fortunately, I had a great color commentator who had been a college wrestler, because once the match started, I really felt like I had no idea what I was watching. And I was like the traffic cop. I would give, here's Mike Vaccaro, 19 years of age, a junior from Wilmington, North Carolina, with a record of 19-0, and then set up the opponent. And once they started, I really had no clue. So my partner carried me through that day.
Yeah, sometimes what makes a good play-by-play guy is a good analyst, right? They can help you just fill in the gaps there, and they know what they're looking at, even if you don't, right, Tay? Sometimes.
Exactly. And sometimes less is more.
Let's talk about the NFL. As you said, Fox came around at a good time for a lot of broadcasters. What's it been like calling NFL games on that platform?
Well, it's hard to believe that this is year 30. It's astounding. More than half my life, I've called NFL games on Fox, and I cover a lot of this in my book. But in 1993, late in the season, it was announced that Fox and Rupert Murdoch had made this crazy bid and earned the rights, took the rights away from CBS, which had been doing the NFC package for over 35 years at the time. And a number of us were really in the right place at the right time. We went out to LA for auditions, and Fox decided to hire 2 veteran crews, John Madden and Pat Summerall, Dick Stockton and Matt Millen. But after that, they went with 4 young play-by-play announcers, myself, Joe Buck, Tom Brenneman, and Kevin Harlan. We were all between 25 and 32 at the time. And Kevin had done some football radio for the Kansas City Chiefs, but the other 3 of us did not have much football experience. Fox took a chance on us, and I'm really proud to say that I'm still there 30 years later. Joe Buck's had a Hall of Fame career now at ESPN. Tom Brenneman over 25 years at Fox, and Kevin Harlan's had a great career first at Fox, then at CBS, and Turner as well. So it's been great. I think I'm up to 476 games. There's a gentleman who keeps track of this stuff. It's online. Working with Jonathan Vilma for the 4th year and a terrific crew. I've had so many great partners and production folks. Started out working with Ron Pitts as my analyst, and then Hall of Famer Anthony Munoz for a year. Tim Green, a Syracuse grad, for 7 years. Brian Baldinger for 4. Another Syracuse grad, Darryl Johnston, along with Tony Siragusa for a decade. Rondé Barber just inducted into the Hall of Fame, and now Jonathan Vilma. So great people. It's a lot of fun, and again, hard to believe that it's 30 years.
Yeah, you worked with some guys. You just said Barber going into the Hall of Fame this year. I want to ask you about Tony Siragusa. Obviously, we lost him way too early, but a great personality. What was your experience like with him? And I'm sure it had to be incredible behind the scenes traveling with a guy like that.
It was one of my favorite people, and still hard to believe that we lost him just over a year ago. I was just at a charity event, saw a number of his family members and friends, and they do a great job with Goose Flights with his partner in the aviation business, Dirk Vandersteer, and now they're flying Make-A-Wish kids to various events, and they're flying former NFL players to medical appointments in other cities. So for the listeners, check it out, Goose Flights. It's a great organization. But when I look back at the 8 years that Darryl and Tony and I worked together, they are definitely the most fun memories that I have. And I'm not only talking about the games. Tony was a guy that could never sit still. He was always on the move. He loved the next adventure. So on Saturday mornings, when we had some free time, we would go into the NFL cities on Friday and go to team practices, and then the home team, and do the same thing with the visiting team when they got into their hotel Saturday afternoon, sit down and chat with a number of players and coaches. But we had 4 or 5 hours every Saturday morning. And Tony was not one who wanted to just sit in his hotel room and watch television. He always wanted to be doing something. So, and I write about this in my book as well, but there are a number of things that I've done once in my life, and it was with Tony and our crew, and that I never would have done otherwise. Whether it was going on a swamp boat tour in Louisiana, petting baby alligators, getting soaked by Shamu at SeaWorld in San Diego, going on the boat, down into Niagara Falls and getting soaked there as well. The only time I've ever held or shot a gun at a range in Dallas was with Tony and Moose. A number of others. I sat in the passenger seat in a race car in Charlotte, was driven around 3 laps at 150 miles an hour. Tony actually drove his own car. So again, these are all things I did once, never will again. But those are some of the memories that I have of the time that we spent with Tony. And then during the broadcasts, he was unique. He was down in the field, but he never wanted to be known as a sideline reporter. He was a sideline analyst. He would see things that nobody else did. He had an incredible setup with monitors down behind the one end zone every week. So just tremendous memories of the time we spent together. And really during the NFL season, you're with your crew for more hours per week than you're with your family. We get together Friday morning through Sunday night when we head to the airport after the game, and we have so many meals together, and 18, 20 weeks in a row, you really do become a family.
Yeah, I'm sure those Siragusa stories are certainly worth the price of that book, right? A Mike for All Seasons, again, coming out October 10th. Some great stories there for sure. I want to go back to 2009 for you. As 4 events in 4 days, and it was 4 different sports as well. As you said, you haven't said no to a lot of opportunities. When you saw what this schedule was going to be like, what was your thought at the front end? What was it like making your way through this stretch for you?
Yeah, I love those times of the year. In October, I've had a number of different years where maybe I had 4 different sports in the span of a week or two. Back in 2019, I had 5 sports in about 2.5 weeks, including a boxing match. But that particular week that you referenced, it involved hockey, basketball, football, and the baseball wasn't play-by-play. It was doing post-game interviews after a Yankees playoff game, after a football game in Pittsburgh that day. So it's a bit of a whirlwind, but I find that for some reason, when I have multiple sports in a short period, I almost get more done. You're more focused, more organized. I get a lot of work done on planes and taxis and Ubers and in hotels. So I'm kind of used to it after all these years. I mean, these days, October, November, and December, on a regular basis, I'm often doing 3 sports in 1 week with an NFL game on the weekend, hockey during the week, and also fill in on about 15 Knicks games on MSG throughout the course of the year. So many of those fall during that time period as well.
As you prepare for all these sports, is there one that's harder to prepare for?
My checklist is the same for all events, but football definitely takes up more time because you're seeing teams, I'm not affiliated with one team. Mm-hmm. I see the Rangers all the time, the Knicks pretty frequently, the various NHL teams on Turner you get familiar with by watching games. They play 3 or 4 times a week and broadcasting other games. But with football, I could have a game week 12 involving 2 teams I haven't done all year. So you're really playing catch up on their seasons. There are so many players. There's 1 game a week. There are so many eyeballs on it. So I'll start for an NFL game on a Monday morning, and I'll try to watch both teams' previous game early in the week. There's a lot of reading that goes into it, preparing charts and statistics and looking through other research materials. And then, like I said, Friday we usually go into the home team practice and get to sit down with a couple of players and coaches, do the same thing with the visiting team Saturday. So for football, it's really a week-long process. I've never really tallied it up, but it's probably 20, 30, 40 hours per week total when you take everything into account. Hockey and basketball are different. Like I said, they're playing a lot of games. Yeah. You're watching, you're paying attention, you're reading. So the preparation for football definitely is the one that's the most time-consuming by far.
As a broadcaster or anybody doing something in New York, is there more pressure on you to be good, to get it right because of so many critics out there in the New York media and just a New York fan base?
Yeah, I don't know if there's more pressure because of the size of the city and the fan base. I think these days with social media, everybody's a critic, so it doesn't matter where you're working. Anybody can watch or listen to any given game, so the critics are everywhere. And you only usually hear from people who have negative comments, right? You never hear from people with positive feedback. But no, I look at it, I think of the old Joe DiMaggio quote, who took every game like it was his last, because you never know, there might be somebody watching you for the first time. So I'll prepare for a preseason game the same as I will for a playoff game. Each broadcast I feel is just as important as the next or the last. And I'll go through that same checklist for every event. I had the great fortune to work 1 Super Bowl, an international feed, the world feed, the Super Bowl 46, and prepared the same way, for that game like I do for the regular season games, because all of those games are equally as important.
But then for a Super Bowl, you sit down and you see the scope of the game. Do you ever let that get into your head? How do you not let that get into your head, I guess?
No, that was exciting. And it was different because we were never on camera. It was similar to a radio broadcast, even though it was a TV call. And I was working with Joe Theismann. We had done the Washington preseason games for many years together. So you do kind of pinch yourself and say, this is the Super Bowl. But once the game starts, you're calling it like a regular game. And, I've worked Stanley Cups on both radio and TV, and baseball playoffs and some basketball playoff games. But there is that extra excitement before the kickoff or puck drop or tip in a basketball game or first pitch in baseball. But really, once the game starts, it's the same fundamentals as there would be during all of the other games that you called.
3,000 plus broadcasts, as you said. You've mentioned it, some of the biggest games. Is there anything that you wish you could broadcast or you want to at some point in the future? Anything out there that you're not doing right now?
Well, again, Mike, really lucky to be involved in the Stanley Cup now every other year. And like I said, I've done baseball playoffs and some college bowl games, Pro Bowl, some all-star games in various sports. The ultimate goal for any play-by-play broadcaster would be the Super Bowl on network television in the U.S. And again, it was great doing it, the international feed, and it's a lifetime memory. But that's probably the one that haven't done yet. But, only one person can every year, and it rotates between 4 networks. So it's not like you can just show up and say, hey, I'm working today. But no, just to continue doing what I love. I never feel like I'm going to work, despite the fact that there's so much work and travel involved. Never feel like I'm working. Get to visit great cities and stay in nice hotels and go to good restaurants. Again, real fortunate that I've been doing this for 33 years and hopefully for many more years to come.
How much pride do you put in the fact that you're doing all four of the major sports and really the only person that's doing that? What does that say about you and just what you've been able to do and accomplish over these years?
Well, I'm lucky in that the networks that I work for, first of all, they're so cooperative as far as the jigsaw puzzle of the schedule. But working for Fox, hired initially for football, but then they acquired other sports, did hockey for Fox and some college basketball and baseball for a long time now. With MSG, originally hired to do the Rangers, and now for the last 12 or 13 years have worked about a quarter of the games on the Knicks side. So it's somewhat of a function of the fact that those networks have the sports that they do. There have been a number of others through the years that have done all four, and not necessarily at the same time. Yeah. So I do take pride in that. And I touch on this in my book a little bit. Marty Glickman, who I mentioned earlier, the late, great Bob Wolf, my father and one of my uncles, Steve, have done all four. And then a number of current day broadcasters, Sean McDonough, Bob Wischusen, and I know they've done all four at some point throughout their careers. Many have done three, but it is fun to be able to say that I do all four simultaneously, I guess, for the last decade plus.
Yeah, again, it shows how prepared you are and how prepared you have to be able to do all those and do them as well as you do. Through your time, give me one of your favorite, maybe best athletes that you've had a chance to maybe call a game of or just work with, calling their games and interview during your time.
Well, the two that I always mention as just the nicest, most down to earth during meetings or interviews, Wayne Gretzky and Brett Favre. And I've gotten to know Wayne very well through the last couple of years. He was with the Rangers in the late 90s, so I knew him a little bit, and then part of the Turner team. He actually wrote one of the forwards to my book along with Walt Clyde Frazier, which is very exciting. But and Brett Favre as well during football production meetings. You never got the sense that he wanted to be anywhere else. He would give us all the time in the world. During those years with Goose and Moose, it would be a lot of hunting and fishing talk and family, but would give you as much time as you needed. I mean, there are so many others. Peyton and Eli Manning, Aaron Rodgers, all so cordial. I can go down and name so many, but and then as far as analysts that I've worked with, I might hold the record. I've worked with over 250 color analysts throughout my career. Some of them, many of them for only one game, others for 10, 15, 18 years. And the list is in my book, the list of my color analysts. Hopefully I didn't forget anybody, but I was at the Football Hall of Fame ceremonies. I had never been to Canton, and I went for Rondé Barber, and I counted it up. I've had the fortune to work with 15 Pro Football Hall of Famers.
Nice.
And in the other sports as well. I've worked with some of the top analysts in the history of sports television, Tim McCarver on the baseball side, and Troy Aikman and many others on the football side. Walt Clyde Frazier, who went into the Hall of Fame as a broadcaster last year, and then too many to name in hockey. Eddie Olczyk, who's done the Stanley Cup pretty much every year for the last 2 decades, and many of my other colleagues at Turner, NBC, and MSG. So I've enjoyed each and every one of them. I try to do a little homework on their careers before the first time that I work with them, because you never know what might be relevant during a game, and just a lot of fun to work with the different personalities.
And again, you can find that list, A Mic for All Seasons, out October 10th from Triumph Books. Certainly looking forward to seeing that book. Again, you're a busy man. You mentioned you're on the road a lot and you spend a lot of time with your colleagues and maybe not as much time with your family. How do you find that balance between your job and your family, especially someone, as prominent as you are?
Actually, the last 2 months or so, not much work. So a lot of great family time. They came to the Hall of Fame. My wife and my two daughters were with me in Canton. I grew up in a similar fashion with my father, probably not away as much. He was away a lot, but maybe not as much. But during the week, the years I was growing up in school, kindergarten through 12th grade, he was also doing the 6 and 11 o'clock news at WNBC in New York. So he would be gone. I'd go to school. He'd be asleep, and then he'd leave around noon for Manhattan and would get home after midnight. Now I would get to tag along once in a while, but so it was kind of the norm for me growing up. And then when my wife's been great about it right from the start, she totally understood my schedule, and she's been unbelievable with picking up the slack when I'm not there, which is often. My daughters are 23 and 20, and it's what they grew up with, so they were used to it. But there are a lot of advantages. Even though I was away most weekends and missed a lot of the weekend activities, I was home more often during the week than a lot of parents. So I would drive to school whenever I could, pick up from school, go to various weekday activities. So it was kind of the opposite of most people, but we made it work, and they came away with me once in a while and would come to games. So, we always like to say it wasn't the norm, but it was our norm.
Yeah, wives and families are certainly the superheroes sometimes for broadcasters like us. Like I said, when you're on the move quite a bit and away from home. You mentioned off air before we got started that one of your daughters just graduated from Syracuse. Are they looking for broadcast aspirations? Is that at all in their plans?
She works behind the scenes. She was in Newhouse, my daughter Amanda, and she's a video editor and producer at the National Hockey League. So
nice.
She is doing a great job editing hockey highlights, working on NFTs and some other programming at the NHL. So she had a great 4 years at Syracuse, had an internship in the athletic department, editing highlights for their social media during her junior and senior years. And then my younger daughter, Sydney, is a junior at the University of Wisconsin, also a journalism major. So we'll see where that leads over the next couple of years. But Amanda they both grew up obviously around sports, and she's done a great job for the last year working at the NHL behind the scenes as an editor. She also won an Emmy, by the way, as part of her the group she was working with at NBC during the Olympics a couple of years ago.
Really?
She produced digital highlights, and her group won an Emmy award.
Wow. Okay. So she's following right in line, right?
Local Emmys, but she has the first national Emmy in our household.
There you go. She's got some bragging rights over you for sure.
Exactly. She always points out the size of the Emmy. The national is a lot bigger than the local.
Yeah, there you go. Nice. Where do you see the future of this business? Again, you mentioned, during the pandemic, doing some of those remote broadcasts, which I'm sure had challenges to it. And they're talking about artificial intelligence, but I mean, they're not going to get rid of the play-by-play guy, right? I mean, where do you see this medium and your job kind of evolving over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I hope not. I don't think they'll ever be able to get rid of the play-by-play announcer, so that's a good thing. So much has changed with technology. I remember when I started at Fox in '94, in order to watch the previous games, they would send us VHS tapes that we wouldn't get until Wednesday. They would have to make copies on Monday and then send them out on Tuesday. Now, go on your computer, iPad, you can watch any game, anytime, live or on tape. Back then, they were sending us articles on fax paper. I would have to buy rolls of fax paper. Now, you can click on the internet and it's all right there. So as far as the on-air product, the graphics, the cameras, the technology have changed on a year-to-year basis for the better. But like you said, hopefully there'll always be the need for the play-by-play broadcaster.
So again, tell us about the book here. How did it come about? I mean, you're still a relatively young guy at 55, even though you have a lot of experience, obviously. But why write this book now, and how did it all get started?
I feel like I have a lot of stories, and I speak to several high school and college broadcasting camps every summer in the New York, New Jersey area. And all of the kids ask great questions, and I wind up telling the same stories and giving the same answers. So I figured, why not put it down on paper? And I've always enjoyed writing, did a lot of writing in high school and college, did it myself, no ghostwriter.
Nice.
Thought about it, but wanted it to be my words, my voice, my stories. And my family was pushing me to do it. and really started during the pandemic when I had a lot of free time. I was home for 146 straight days doing
Not that
nothing.
you were counting.
Every night at dinner, I would make an announcement. This is dinner number 57. My family got tired of that after a while, but started writing an outline and some sample chapters during the pandemic. Wound up meeting a book agent named Andrew Blauner in New York by email, and he shopped it around to various publishers. Triumph Books out of Chicago was interested, and here we are. So over the last 2 years, finished it up. Last summer of 22, was the big push. I had to get to 70,000 words. When I was at 30,000, I was thinking, how am I ever going to get to 70,000? And I think I wound up at 80, and then they edited a bit. It was due last September, gone through the whole editing process, rereading and making corrections and changes. And now it's at the printer as we speak, and out to the public October 10th. And apparently I'll have some copies in early September. So can't wait to see it.
All right. I was going to say, so you don't have that copy just yet. I'm sure that'll be a great feeling.
I've seen digital copies. I've seen digital versions,
Yeah.
but not the absolute final version with all the changes and corrections.
So part autobiography, part lessons as well. If we've got, young broadcasters or future broadcasters watching or listening, there's some advice in there as well.
Absolutely. A lot of the stories we've just told and talked about starts with early life, growing up into the first job, doing minor league hockey, the early Fox years, a chapter on each sport, chapter on the Olympics, a chapter on analysts I've worked with, a chapter on travel stories, a chapter on the COVID years when we did things a lot differently, a lot of family stuff interspersed throughout, but also a chapter on paying it forward and advice for young broadcasters. And again, a lot of the subjects we just discussed. So it's really a combination of all of those areas that I just mentioned, a chapter on the Olympics as well. So it was a lot of fun and just so honored that Wayne and Clyde participated. There were some blurbs and quotes from other friends and colleagues in the industry. So can't wait for the general public to finally see it.
Yeah, again, some heavy hitters there with Wayne Gretzky and Clyde Frazier. Not too bad for guys that write the forward. And again, for broadcasting, there's no A to B. There's no one way to do it. So as you talk to young broadcasters, is there one bit of advice that you give them maybe above anything else that you talk to them about?
Probably the fact that the preparation is the most important thing in my mind. So I talk about that a lot in the book. I talk about the differences between TV and radio, the differences between the various sports, all of the questions that I've been answering for the last 25 years at these camps and schools and colleges. So there's an entire chapter on that, on giving advice and paying it forward.
Social media, how social are you? How can people follow you as well in your progress as you get ready for a very busy time of the year with the fall starting up?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Instagram. Feel free to follow. I usually post a photo before every broadcast. Hopefully it helps the viewership or the listenership on radio. So I'll post a photo from the broadcast booth. If anybody looking to get into the business ever has any questions, happy to answer them, via direct message or email. So, pretty active as far as posting at least one photo from each and every event.
What's the coolest thing that's happened to you outside of sports broadcasting because of your sports broadcasting career? Wow,
that's a good question. I've been in a couple of movies as a play-by-play broadcaster, so I'm not sure if that counts. Game Day, starring Richard Lewis and Joanna Mann. You may remember that one about 20 years ago. Just a lot of the things that we get to do, whether it's a couple of White House tours that I've gone on through the years. I've tried in recent years more so, in the early years, I was probably so bogged down with the preparation and getting ready for the next game that I didn't do as much exploring as I should have in certain cities. But over the last 10 years or so, I've done a little more of that, whether it's going to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland or the Alamo in San Antonio, Graceland in Memphis. And I write about some of these in the book as well. But I've tried to take advantage. They fly us to these cities and put us up in nice hotels. So why not take advantage and do some exploring of historical sites while you're there?
And I'm sure stuff that you're able to bring into your broadcast as well to kind of give a better picture of where you're at and the surroundings.
Right. Definitely able to do that once in a while.
There's always stories to tell. Well, Kenny, can't thank you enough on a game day for you joining us here today. And certainly we'll be following your progress, getting ready for that book. Again, it comes out October 10th. Hope a lot of folks listening and watching get that. And again, some great stories that you shared, pieces of them with us here today, and some great advice as well for our young broadcasters who might be watching or listening. But I appreciate your time. I wish you the best of luck in all your travels coming up.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed chatting about the book and all the other subjects, and good luck with your upcoming seasons.
Hey, our thanks to Kenny Albert for joining us here today in episode 76. We thank you for watching and listening as well. And remind you to check out his new book coming out October 10th, A Mike for All Seasons, published by our friends from Triumph Books. We invite you as well to like, to subscribe, to share our show. Help us grow, as we'll have more great guests coming up in the next couple of weeks. Thanks for joining us here today. For the J.R. Quitman behind the scenes, our creator, producer, and director, I'm Mike Vaccaro. We'll see you next time. Another edition of In the Front Row with Mike Vaccaro. Have a great day, everybody.